Hey, friends, welcome back to Pastor's Wives Tell All. On the podcast today, we get to chat with our friends, Scotty and Keith Puglisi. Scotty and Keith have been married for 14 years and have 3 children, ages 20, 13, and 11. Keith has been a pastor for over 20 years, and Scotty just does her best not to get into trouble. In our conversation, Scotty and Keith open up about the hardest time in their marriage and how they brought their struggle to the light in front of the church family. Though the church's support and counseling and a whole lot of hard work, their marriage is now stronger than ever. And they are sharing their story in hope, and it will help other pastors' couples who are facing marital strife. So much wisdom, y'all. Now, let's get to the conversation. Hi, I'm Jessica.
I'm Jenna.
And I'm Stephanie.
And you are listening to Pastor's Wives Tell All,
a podcast by pastors' wives for church leaders and anyone desiring to take a peek inside our glass house.
We are breaking down walls and crushing pastors' wives stereotypes within the church.
We want pastors' wives and other ministry leaders to know that they are not alone in this. Plus, this is basically therapy for the three of us with a whole lot of dance parties. Whoop, whoop.
Scotty, Keith, welcome to the podcast. We're excited to have you.
Thanks. We're excited to be here.
Super excited.
Okay, so I have to say, Scotty is our soul sister, I feel like, at this point.
Yes.
She came to one of our retreats a little over a year ago, and she is hilarious. And we have a similar background of going to cult-like colleges. So there's that. We bonded over that. That's a whole nother podcast episode. And then you got to come to another retreat because we really came to you in Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah. Yes. We are obsessed with your accents up there.
Seriously.
I'm not going to lie.
It took us a while to click back in when we got home. We kept using the accent. It was great.
Yeah. We love y'all. And we heard a story about y'all. And we are excited to have you on to talk a little bit more about that because we think it's going to change lives.
Yeah.
Sure.
So let's jump right in. So we want you to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about yourselves and your marriage and a little bit about your ministry timeline. How long has it been? All the things.
Sure. So we've been married 14 years. Actually, last Wednesday was our wedding anniversary. And we have 3 kids, 20, almost 13, and almost 11. So, yeah. So some people are like trying to do the math. How can they be married 14 years and have a 20-year-old? But it can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we serve with the Christian Missionary Alliance up here in the north. We're not too far from the Canadian border, and it's kind of cold. Like we're outside looking at like frost on our grass. Like our grass looks white right now because of all the frost, and our trees are super colorful, and it literally is just so beautiful to live here. So anyway, that's kind of a nutshell about where we are and what we do. And Keith has been a pastor for almost 20 years, right?
Yep. Been a New Song, the church. It's Scotty said, a Christian Missionary Alliance church. Planted it and moved here in 2005 to Grand Rapids, 2005. Been here 19 years. It was a start from scratch with the help of a local church, sister church. And I was here 5 years, kind of laying the foundation of the church plant. And then met Scotty. I was 35. I got married when I was 36. We met and married in just under 5 months. So it was fast.
4 months and 28 days.
4 months and 28 days. Yeah.
Wow. Good job, Scotty.
So we navigated her adjusting to ministry, blended family, became a stepdad the same day we were married. I was excited about that with Tracy, and adjusted to ministry. Church was going through a real tough time at this when we got married. So we really had to learn ministry together through a challenging time, but we are now 14 years into that and really haven't looked back since then. The church has just continued to be healthy and grow. And
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, we actually got to see your church for like 10 minutes before we left Minnesota.
Yes.
Scotty was like, you have to come to our church. And we made it happen.
Yes, we
and
did.
it is a beautiful church. And we know that you have been doing a lot of work to it with your own bare hands, especially during COVID. We got to hear that story of how y'all really saved a lot of money and did a lot of the upgrades yourself. And so it's really a sweet church and a beautiful church. So y'all are doing an amazing job. So just for y'all to know that and be encouraged. And so today we're going to dive right in because we've got a lot to talk about. We want to dive right into just marriage. And I think this is something that we can always come back to because there's just sweet testimony in everyone's marriage, especially in ministry. But hearing your story, we know that the enemy definitely came to steal, kill, and destroy it. And that's what he wants to do with every marriage. And so we really hope and pray that this, through your testimony, this will reach a lot of people. So we want to dive right in. And Scotty, I'm going to start with you. If you just kind of share a little bit of when things started to change. Yes, you came into ministry, but when did you start to see a shift and a change in your marriage and your communication?
Yeah, so I would say for sure it was probably about 3 years ago. I mean, I know pastors' wives typically do a lot in the church, kind of like that unpaid, unseen full-time worker or part-time worker.
Yeah.
But it got to the point where like I was doing so much. Like I remember one day like taking a broom and knocking off the cobwebs off the front of our church, or like you pick up everything, you see anything on the floor, you pick it up. Or one person can't do children's church and you jump in because you're like, I can and I do a good job, so I want to do this. There's a funeral and you wind up running all the food and everything, and you're there to set up and then you're there to clean up, and it just wound up becoming like I was doing everything and I was not delegating anything at all. I ran the women's ministry team, which I love. But I literally was doing everything without asking help, and then kind of probably became like, I think I had like a savior mentality. Like I literally came to save these people, like not like salvation save, but like if I wasn't here, this would all kind of fall apart. And
Yeah.
I think that's pretty sinful, to be super honest. I think it's not godly or where Jesus ever intended me to be. One of the elders actually made a comment that it was the Scotty show. And I was like, oh crap. Yeah, that's not where I want to be. I don't want, this is not about me. Like, and we are both super hardcore gospel people. We want the world to know that Jesus came to save them and to give them hope of eternity. And to see that I had kind of almost like warped my ministry, my calling, whatever, was really humbling, and that was a really hard pill to swallow, to hear that. So when Keith would come home from work, because we were so engrossed in ministry, he would come home and the first thing out of my mouth would be like, how was your meeting? Did you know about this person? How about this situation? Do you know what happened with that check for offering? Do you know? By the way, we don't know who gives at our church, which is like, it was always like church related. And then we'd go out on a date night, and then the questions would always revolve around church. And the lines of our ministry and our marriage had totally blurred. So there was like no separation from church and marriage. Like I feel like that needs to be a book, The Separation of Church and
So
Marriage.
true.
So yeah, that kind of led to my husband made a comment one day. He said, if we didn't talk about church, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. And that kind of broke my heart too. And yeah, I guess it kind of just kept, when you keep having a marriage outside of your ministry, like, I mean, when you only talk about church and your marriage takes a back seat,
Right.
and then it takes extra shots in it. The romance isn't there, the intentionality isn't there, the connecting isn't there, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like roommates doing ministry together. And because we were so focused, like it was like train tracks, like we're so focused on doing ministry, we literally let the marriage kind of slide back. And it kind of came to a point where there was no feelings between us. And the worst part is like, was literally my thoughts towards him had changed. My thoughts had gone to, man, that guy sucks. Man, he's such a jerk. Like, I bet I could be with somebody else who would treat me better. Like, I'm sure, if a guy was nice to me, I'm like, well, I wish my husband would be that nice to me. So for me, I think my biggest battle really was in my mind. Like, your thoughts really need to be taken captive and laid before the foot of the cross. Like that verse says, you'll take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. And that probably was my biggest struggle.
Well, that's hard. And I have been there. It's funny, you're saying those thoughts and I'm going, ooh, I have thought those very same things about my husband. And it has to be the enemy. Why are we both having the same exact thoughts? I know other women who have thought those things as well. And he wants to destroy the family. But Keith, I want to hear from you and your perspective as well. What was going on in your mind and in your heart during this time? Were you having some lies enter your head as well? What was going on?
So Scotty did a great job highlighting that. If I went back about that 3 years, just perspective, our church doubled in size after COVID. We really pushed through COVID, keeping ministry moving, adapted online as fast as we could. And we had just really seen the church, literally, we doubled in size. We're not a huge church, I guess, depending on how you consider that, but we were about 150 at the time. And coming through that, now we're, 300, 400 with kids. The numbers can vary a little bit. I could talk optimistically. Pastors love to quote on the numbers, but so for my side of the story, or my perspective, is that I had found myself trying to navigate and stay ahead of the growth, adding staff to services. And the slip was that I started to I began to promote ministry over family. That's really the simple summary. And things like justifying late phone calls and texting all the time, and being at dinner and taking texts all the time, and scheduling things. And really, my heart never really turned against my wife. It was more that it was turning more to ministry. And it was starting to pull my emotions and my heart and attitude and thoughts. And so she just became less of a priority, but in my mind, she was still the first priority. But in practical application, that wasn't what was happening.
Oh, that last statement.
That's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, because I think that there's probably a lot of people who are going to go, oh,
yeah,
wow.
Because I think that's the last thing to kind of see is your actual actions, to like look internally and go, am I actually putting this into practice?
Like, I think I am.
But I think we can become prideful too, even if a husband or a wife is saying, hey, you're not doing this, like, hey, I'm missing this. First it's the pride that comes in, that no, I am doing this, like I am.
Yeah.
Or like, you don't see that I'm doing all of this, and then we just like dismiss their hurt and their pain and their feelings. So there's a lot of ways you can go with that, but I think that's a really interesting way, Keith, to kind of put that. And I bet a lot of people, man or woman, have felt that way. I know I have.
I'm pretty sure I have too. Me and my husband have both been in that. So I'm so glad you said that out loud.
Yeah, that was good, Keith.
Yeah.
Jessica, you said something that actually is really funny. You made the comment that, people should know, or in this case, does my wife not realize all that I'm doing?
Yeah.
Does she not realize all of the things at church that I'm carrying? And I actually remember, unfortunately, coming home many times and saying, you don't understand what I'm dealing with here. And you should have more grace and compassion, even though I haven't, even though I, even though I
Y'all
have,
need to be watching on YouTube. Yes. Scotty, that was
Scotty.
great.
But it's, honestly, I think either or can go that way. Because I know I can do that too. I
Yeah.
can go, Jonathan, like, you don't see everything I'm doing behind the scenes. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
I mean, either person can
Yeah.
definitely go there and throw that out there. So
Absolutely.
we're definitely not throwing the pastors under the bus. Like, I think that women that like Scotty that are just doing it all and wanting to be a part of it because they do want to serve, they also can get to the point where you're like, why does anyone not see what I'm doing? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and especially if your communication within the marriage is not going well, then you're not hearing encouragement from the spouse.
Yeah.
Either way.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So
I was just going to say a good point to that is something actually our marriage counselor told me was just because I can do something doesn't mean I should do something.
Mhm.
So now I know it sounds terrible, but I will walk myself over a piece of paper and not pick it up, or I will not take, a shift in the nursery, or I will not take, meals to someone because me doing it means that
Right.
somebody else is not. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's not good either. So
that's good.
So you got to a point, obviously, where both of you knew that something had to change. So tell us when enough was enough and what did you do to start making some changes?
so I think that Scotty realized it before I did. That's really kind of part of our bottoming out, was that she was uh, crying for help, communicating enough, struggles, emotional nights of tears where like we weren't connecting. And for me, it was a combination of emotion, I would say spiritual attack, that kind of culminated one night at home, where it was a heaviness and a darkness that we just hadn't ever experienced. And I remember just really hitting my knees and crying out to God for help and realizing that this is bigger than us. I actually, for me, we have great support in our district. We have superintendents. Every denomination is different, and our superintendents really operate to help support and come alongside. And so he was my first go-to. He's coached me, helped me. We have a good relationship, and he really kind of popped the bubble, gave me the realization that I was heading into burnout, and really helped me. Dan's a great guy, and he helped me realize that this happens, because I felt like a failure. I felt like I had done everything poorly, was going to lose the ministry, family, all of that. And he said, Keith, you're just at your max. And with that, he said, you guys need counseling. I'm gonna get you to do counseling. The time worked out well also, that he also said a sabbatical was gonna be appropriate, which timeline of ministry, length of time, I was past a length of time. People debate on how long a pastor should wait for a sabbatical, how long should be a sabbatical. That's a good discussion for another podcast, you guys do. But it was those are the two things. And that really kind of started down the road. And I don't know how you guys want to tap into that, but it really started down the road, I would say, to a rewriting of my script of marriage, understanding my role, a new level of servanthood in the marriage, that marriage is not about fairness, is about serving one another.
Mhm.
So
That's good.
That's good.
Marriage is not about fairness. It's about serving one another. That might be a quote.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I can unpack that whole thing if you want, but you're in charge. You're in charge of this thing.
Well,
so
I would definitely love, for you to share, if you could summarize it. I know it could be a whole podcast, but I think there's a lot of husbands and wives that need to hear that, because
Absolutely.
that's for the church in general. So let's delve into that a little bit and go, okay, what does it mean to serve versus fairness?
do you guys ever read scripture on your podcast?
oh my word.
Yeah, go ahead.
Read it.
I mean, scripture. What are you talking about?
I'm joking. So I commented on fairness versus serving. one of the first things that really confronted me and doubled me down in my attitude towards marriage was my counselor, Bob. Bob is amazing. I love Bob, Scotty, and I really give credit to him transforming our marriage. Scotty and I both agree. So shout out to Bob. But he said this, and it made sense, is that in America and most marriage is based upon fairness, is that you do this and I do that. And we won't really say that, but it's really how we model it. And he had me reading right off the bat Philippians 2, verses 5 through 10. And you guys will probably know the verses that says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of man." And we know the story, the gospel story. Jesus did that to the death. And I hadn't realized that I had been living in a mindset of fairness with my wife, and that serving really literally means you don't get anything back. There's no benefit on the other side. It's a decision and a trust to love one another, and you're trusting the other person to love you. And because I had become so focused on ministry and all the emotions and all that went with it, I didn't have capacity. Because I hadn't taken care of myself, I did not have capacity to serve my wife without anything coming back. And so whenever she would not give something back, whatever that it was, then I kind of would hit my lid. For me, it was being passive, being withdrawn, not affectionate, and didn't realize that, but that was being called. And even to a point of Bob really creating some disciplines early on that were painful for me, that forced me basically to be accountable. I love ministry. I love pastors, but pastors are some of the hardest people to hold accountable to hold accountable, because we know the challenge of ministry. We know the people in our church that we're leading, and there's almost like an arrogance or confidence that comes that we just really struggle to be submissive to people, especially people in the church, and without realizing it, our wives. And that's what I had done.
That's good. Preacher Keith. Hey, friend, we will get right back to our episode, but we want to take a moment and thank our patrons. You guys keep our podcast going.
If you are not a patron and you would like to consider donating to our podcast ministry, we would be so grateful, and we might even do a happy dance.
When you become a patron, you get perks like being the first to hear about special info and retreats. You get bonus episodes, monthly devotionals, lock screens, and more.
Plus, we have added a new $1 tier for those who believe in us and what we're doing, just because you love us.
So head on over to our show notes and click on the Patreon link to learn more. Now let's get back to our episode.
I think one of the things that you just said is the capacity. I think that's where we get stuck, is especially, let's just take the pastor right now. They don't even know that they are burnout or want to admit that they're burnout and that they are at capacity. So then if they can't even see that, they definitely can't see what they're doing to their spouse, So I think that is one of the biggest problems we have. So Scotty, I'm just going to kind of go off script here. For you probably could see that he was at capacity, that he was at burnout, but he had not realized that yet. So what does the wife do in those moments of wishing there was change, but they don't see it yet? To even get to the marriage, they don't even see that they're burnout and at capacity with ministry. So therefore, they don't see what's happening in the home. So what did you do in the in-between until the Holy Spirit was able to move in and really transform both of you?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that I did it right, that I chose, just to fast and pray and seek the Lord. But I was so broke and so mad and so hurt at him. Like, I would just really try my best to imagine my life without him. And can I do this without him? And try to even picture, how can I get out of this marriage without causing any damage?
Mm.
And there was no way that I could get out of this marriage without wrecking my kids and wrecking our church, our congregation that we love so desperately. So yeah, my thoughts were just really terrible towards my husband. Like, there's just no way that you can break up what God has put together
Mm.
and
Mm.
think that you can do it without creating a disaster. So after I finally kind of got to that point, I was like, we just need to figure out how to make this work. Like, this has to work. And literally, again, it all came back to my mind. My thoughts had to change towards my husband. My thoughts were the launching pad for everything. And so every time a thought came to me that was evil or against my marriage or against my husband, I had to literally cry out to God and say, please help me. And so I would have to literally say, nope, I love my husband. We're going to make this work. We're going to get counsel. We're going to do what we need to. So it was literally like, as much as you can take a ball of Play-Doh and change it, I had to just change it. I had to literally physically take my thoughts and change them. And I knew that that was going to be the only way that we were going to get to the other side.
Mm. So you are starting to get, your superintendent said counseling, all of the things. Y'all are both on the same page, maybe not in your marriage yet, but y'all know that there's an issue. We need to handle it, to allow your minds, take everything captive. Everything is happening. But one of I think the coolest things about y'all's testimony is what happens in the process is, um, and I don't know if you were told to do this or if you both wanted to do this on your own just for vulnerability towards your church. But Keith, can you kind of share with us how you brought this before the church? Because I think this is unheard of. I've never heard of any other couple do this in ministry from the stage. And I think that it needs to be heard and talked about and done. So, will you kind of take us through the process of what happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is unheard of. I realize that this is super sensitive to have or to talk about a pastor and his wife, to get up and give an acknowledgement, call it a confession, I guess, but definitely an acknowledgement of a failure on our side. And a couple things to keep in mind before I share. Our counselor had been very involved in coaching us and walking us through. He knew a good amount of the church where we were at. My leadership and elders, we're elder led in our church denomination. They were involved in this,
Okay.
and so there was an awareness of how this would affect the church. There was definitely a risk in how people could receive it, even though our counselor said that he's recommended this a number of times.
Mm-hmm.
And every time they've done it, the church has always responded with a whole new level of grace, compassion, and support, which is what happened. But I think the key thing was that Scotty and I agreed on what I was going to say. And I think the biggest thing is I just acknowledged that I had been selfish and that I had put ministry over my marriage and my family, and that we had really just recognized a burnout, hitting the bottom, and that I had reached out for counsel. We didn't go into details on all the logistics and the amount of counsel and all of that. But then also the elders, we had already processed a sabbatical, and so after I shared, one of the elders was up there and he shared that to stand in support of us as the lead pastor, the elders want to give a sabbatical to retool, refocus. Um, we did the announcement, I think, in February or March, and the sabbatical wasn't till June. So it was a nice cushion in that it wasn't like we get up one week, we share this, and then the
Right.
next week we're gone.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
That was good.
that could happen.
Mhm.
there are some cases where that would be even more extreme. So we tried to process it out. We wanted to affirm the church that I did affirm there wasn't a moral failure. Those are key words in a church. And so there wasn't a moral failure. There was literally a neglect of caring for my heart, my marriage in the midst of the growing pressures of the church.
Mm. Wow. I just wish more people would do this.
Yeah.
I wish more pastors would get up and admit the problems that they're having. Because I even remember as a child and then growing up, teenagehood, going into college, thinking, oh, I'm called to ministry. It's going to be so great. Pastors are the best husbands, like there's all these thoughts like of a fairy tale that we have because no one talks about these things. Nobody
Yeah.
admits that there are problems. All of a sudden, a couple splits up and you automatically think, oh, bet the wife drove him to it. I remember thinking those things because the pastor could do no wrong. The pastor, he had to be in the right. But for you to humble yourself and to say, hey, I've neglected my wife. And for Scotty to humble herself and say, my thoughts were ugly. More people need to do this. So many more people need to do this. I'm excited for y'all. I'm excited to see how God is going to use this for other people. And right now, I'm just wondering, could you share how is your marriage now? I mean, I know probably nothing is perfect. Okay. There's always room for improvement, I'm sure. But practically, what steps are you taking so that you don't go back to where y'all were? And how can other people utilize those steps that are listening?
Sure. Actually, I want to go back just real quick. The day that we stood up in front of the church, I was visibly wrecked. Like, I mean, I felt the pain coming out of my pores, and I felt like it was visible to everybody for the first time ever. And one thing that we try to tell our kids actually often is that Puglisis, that's our last name, Puglisis do hard things. And I think we want the outcome, but we're often too not willing to put in the hard work to make that outcome happen.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal for us to be able to do that. So even though it was hard, we knew we had to stand up there. We knew that was the right thing to do. So right now, I think our marriage is really good. I feel like we have a cushion that we've probably never had before. We have like this cushion of grace. So like if somebody says something snarky or one of us doesn't get the attention that we need or felt like we needed, there's this cushion of grace. And I don't think we ever had that before. I think it was like, I'm not getting what I want, so I hate you and you're a jerk. And, so now it's like, okay, hang on. I'm sure. I mean, even the other day, like my husband's been working so hard trying to redo our kitchen and put a new roof on and still be at elder meetings and still prepare sermon. And so like if he comes home and he's not like super gracious or kind or really lovey to me, I'm like, I know that man's busy. I know he's busy and I don't take it personally anymore. I've changed so many of my thought patterns, those little habits that get made, that are hard to break. So when he does something or doesn't do something, I don't have those same thought patterns anymore.
Yeah.
It's good.
That's great.
And I would say we are in a totally different place than we ever have been in marriage. It sounds real simple, but it was a callback for me to a lot of the rhythms and basics of what we know to be doing as believers, pastor or not. Taking a Sabbath, doing your devotions, self-care in your soul, recognizing patterns that are rooted, that are coming out, and not sweeping them under the rug. I had heard my wife in the past make comments, but I kept minimizing them. And I think the principle for pastors or those that are leading or have responsibility is really taking serious evaluation of, is the ministry over the family or is the family over the ministry? And we just did cardboard testimonies, and September, and that was my testimony, is that I had put ministry over family. Now it's family over ministry.
That's good.
I have a quick question before Jenna has one. What boundaries did you put? Because Scotty, I know at the retreat you kind of shared with me about some boundaries that you put into place, like during the week.
Yeah, we actually came back from sabbatical and we had a hardcore plan of like, we weren't going to be away from the house more than 3 nights a week.
There we go.
And we only have church on Sunday night. Like our church only meets Sunday night. We have 2 services every Sunday night. And so that has to count as one of our nights away. So we have to be home as a family. That means like my kids probably won't get to be in all the sporting events because our family is more important than the fact that they're never going to be Olympians.
Yeah.
Like
Amen.
that has to be a huge priority, is that we're together. We have dinner together. Yeah, stuff like that.
Rhythms of not texting after a certain a certain time of day.
No phones at the dinner table.
Phones at the dinner table. Limiting. Probably for me, a lot of my knee-jerk reactions that got me in trouble is when someone at church wanted to get together, people that I love and care for. This is the hardest thing. I'm a very relational person. I'm a shepherd. My spiritual gift is shepherding. So I just love and care for people and be with them. And that's been probably the hardest thing for me of all the people that I would want to spend time with that I don't anymore. And I find philosophically, ministry wise, is instead of trying to talk to everybody individually, I see my preaching as me having a conversation with all of my people at one time and saving all of the one-on-ones conversations that you just can't have when your church grows. And I try to really keep them in mind. I still obviously do one-on-one and as I can, but that was a shift I had to make too. So I think a lot more about that when I'm preaching. I think about how my people are thinking, what they're going through, what are the individuals that I know and pray for, and letting the Holy Spirit lead through that as I'm bringing the message that some of this is just a conversation I get to have with my people.
Yeah.
We also just recently installed a bear trap at our front door. So when people from church come over and they want to talk to us,
Oh my goodness.
That
That's
was
great.
That was so
at the
good.
back door.
Okay, so I love what you're saying about you're kind of limiting that one-on-one time just so you can be there with your family. And I think part of that process is discipleship, because you have to disciple people in your church to also care for each other.
Right.
And there's a reason that deacons were created.
Mhm.
So if we're not utilizing our elders and deacons and all of these people who we're supposed to be discipling to go out and then disciple others and have those conversations too, it can't just be all on the pastor.
Right.
Like that's not what God has asked you to do. So
Yeah, that's a great word. Sorry, I jump in
Stephanie.
here,
Yeah.
Stephanie. I do more equipping classes now than I did before.
Mm.
Equipping being an intentional training for groups of people, as opposed to one-on-ones that is going to limit the outreach and capacity. And the other thing with that, the whole mindset is that I really have had to let go and delegate more than before. Some people at my
Yeah.
church would argue that I still don't delegate enough, but it's equipping, delegating, releasing
Yeah.
Yes.
more
That's good.
because we can't do it anymore.
Baby steps.
Yeah, for sure. This is so good, y'all. Like so much good wisdom and advice you've given us already. I was actually going to ask about boundaries, so I'm glad you said something about that, Jessica. Because I think a lot of people in ministry are not utilizing healthy boundaries. So, is there any other advice for men and women who are listening to this episode that you would like to give them? Anything at all?
Yeah, I would say right away, get counseling. Find a great marriage counselor. There's so many opportunities online, even where you don't have to leave your home. You don't have to find a babysitter. You can do it on Zoom. I would just say, if there is marriage issues at all, just go get really great marriage counseling. And I would really just encourage the wives not to really batter their husbands about it. Like, put it out there and shut your mouth and then pray your guts out. Like, that's your job. Your job is
good.
not to batter your husband. You need to go to counseling, whatever, because I will actually probably push him away.
Yes.
So if you really feel like you need it, I would just say it really clearly. I think we could benefit from this. I think we could have a happier future, lay a better foundation for our kids and their mates, because we're showing them how to be husbands and wives, right?
Right.
Mhm.
So let's go do this, and then be quiet, hit your knees, and let it go. Let God take care of it.
That's good. Love it.
You got anything, Keith, before we move on?
I would just say it's change is possible, and it's not as hard as we think. And I just want to encourage maybe specifically pastors, people in ministry, people desiring ministry, that when you choose to serve your spouse, God changes something that you actually become more secure and confident than you ever will be. And that's what I found is my security, my confidence, my when your soul is at rest and peace, and you become more secure, and your life just, you make better decisions, and that has been a huge transformation for me.
Amen.
That's good.
Preach it. This has been good, guys. Okay. So Keith, you do not know this, but Scotty does. We do a final 3 questions. She's like 3. Final 3 questions. And so we're gonna ask them to you, okay? And these are just quick answers, and first thing that comes to your mind. So if each of you could go back and give your pre-pastor and pastor's wife self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Don't pick up the paper.
I
I would just say,
I like
hey,
that.
you gotta like teach other people how to take care of the Lord's house. You gotta not take this on yourself. This is not your building. This is not your issues. Like, this is God's church. So don't feel like you need to do everything. I'd say pick 2 lanes maybe, and stay with that.
Yeah.
Mine would be when my wife voices concern or struggles, to stop for a minute and have her explain, to really validate what she's saying and try to understand instead of just dismissing it.
Ooh.
That's good.
Preach.
Preach it, preach it, preach it again for those in the back.
Mhm.
Okay, number 2. What do you do for fun together to get your mind off of all things ministry?
We go get coffee.
Sounds
Go sit and
perfect.
have coffee, and then we watch TV.
Football.
Usually, I love here for football. As some kind of TV series on TV is kind of our time.
We guilty confession here. Everybody loves Raymond, and I can't tell you how many times we watched those seasons.
I can't say that I love Everybody Loves, but it's been a show that we can watch together.
That's
Yeah.
good.
and it's just simple and easy. It's not
Yeah.
painful.
That's funny. I have a question. Do you yell at the TV when you watch football?
Yeah, actually, our daughter is worse. Our 11-year-old, she loves. So we're big. I mean, we're Vikings fans. I am from Michigan, so I'm kind of a Detroit fan too. But Brooklyn, our daughter is like, she has a Justin Jefferson jersey. She's like, what? Like, just like that little girl from Titans. She's just like, she's all in.
That's
So
amazing.
That's amazing.
Okay,
I
that's
like it.
so great. All right, final question, guys. It's a biggie. So here we go. If you could tell the church congregation one thing without reservation and have them really listen and respond, what would you say?
I know exactly what I'd say. I would ask them to understand the weight of ministry.
Mm.
The weight of ministry and the sacrifice that pastors and pastors' wives make for the gospel.
Mm.
I wish, without no agenda, because I love my church, I love people. is I think a lot in the Old Testament about the Levites, who were the priests,
Mm-hmm.
that God specifically didn't give them money and income, and they were to depend upon the church.
Yeah.
And that sacrifice for pastors and pastors' wives that are men and women that are capable of getting jobs that could pay sometimes literally 3, 4, 5 times what they're making in ministry. And the sacrifice, the weight on the children. Sorry, I'm getting passionate here.
Oh, it's fine. You're standing on the pulpit right now and just saying all the things.
I think if they could understand for a minute or what that looks like, the level of participation and support to step over offenses, even disagreements with the pastor, it would. I feel like the gospel would move across our land because I think there's such a weight that it's not equally balanced, and so I would want them to walk in our shoes, and again, we have to be willing to do the same. That's why we made the confession. That's why we made the public confession, is that I want our church people to be humble and vulnerable for us to lead them. And I'm a hypocrite if I can't do that for them in my own personal life.
Keith, you better preach.
Good.
He did.
He did. He was preaching. Okay, Scotty.
Scotty.
Your time to preach. Get it, girl.
I don't think I want to preach because my husband's really good at it. He really actually is a really good pastor and preacher. I just want to have them all take me to a Mexican restaurant because I've never been sad at a Mexican restaurant. So I'm like, if we could have all these discussions over some margaritas and nachos, I think
Please do. I love you so much.
Yes.
That's perfect.
a lot better. This guy's talking to me in Spanish and I'm like, see.
Oh my gosh. I love you
Leave
so
it
much.
to Scotty to end on that note.
That was perfect.
Until next time, guys.
We love you guys. Thank you so much. Okay, friends, if you have enjoyed this episode as much as we have, please help us spread the word on Facebook and Instagram.
If you didn't know yet, Instagram is where all the fun is at. From dance reels on Wednesdays to spiritual encouragement and laugh out loud posts in between, there is something for everyone.
And last but certainly not least, if you could take a moment right now to stop what you're doing and give us a rating and review, even subscribe to our podcast, this seriously helps other people find us who wouldn't be able to otherwise. Thank you so much for your love and support. We hope you'll tune in next week.